Hello YouTube. So I've been reading the book Paradox and Paraconsistency by John Woods, and he describes what he calls philosophy's most difficult problem. And it just made me wonder, what do you think is philosophy's most difficult problem? Here's what John Woods thinks is philosophy's most difficult problem. Consider an argument for some surprising conclusion. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, etc. conclusion. So we have a set of premises leading to a surprising philosophical claim. Philosophy's most difficult problem is, and I quote, that of adjudicating in a principled way the conflict between supposing that the argument is a sound demonstration of a counterintuitive truth as opposed to seeing it as a counterexample of its premises. The point is that when we're faced with a valid argument, it's always possible to reject the conclusion and treat one of the premises as false. Indeed, this isn't just possible, it's often quite reasonable, because many of the premises of any interesting philosophical argument will themselves be controversial philosophical claims. So you can continue to reject the conclusion while also rejecting one of the premises as well. Woods gives the example of the debate around determinism. The classic argument against free will for hard determinism would go something like this. All human actions are macro natural events. All macro natural events have a cause. If there are any free actions, they are uncaused. Therefore, there are no free actions. Obviously, we need to say macro there to rule out quantum indeterminacy and stuff like that, which is not taken to be relevant to this. But, you know the argument if you're familiar with free will and determinism. Anyway, there are two ways to take this argument. On the one hand, we can treat it as a sound demonstration of the claim that there's no free will. We can accept the counterintuitive conclusion. Alternatively, we might treat the argument as a reductio of its premises. We can say, well, there is free will, so one of the premises must be false. The overall debate looks something like this. The hard determinist says premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, so conclusion, so C. The defender of free will says, well, not C, so either not P1, not P2, or not P3. Now, of course, each of these arguments appears question-begging from the point of view of the opponent. They're question-begging because each has a premise that negates the conclusion of the other. If you're at all familiar with philosophy, it should be easy to see how this problem crops up everywhere. One of the more famous examples is More's use of this in his famous argument against skepticism. The standard argument for external world skepticism would go something like this. If I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat, then I don't know that there is an external world. I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat, so I don't know that there is an external world. Famously, the Morean shift simply reverses the argument. I know that there's an external world, so either premise 1 or premise 2 is false. This Morean argument is valid if the skeptic's argument is valid. And what underlies the Morean argument is the thought that the proposition, I know that there is an external world, is far more intuitive, far more obvious than any philosophical proposition you might use in an argument against the claim that you know that there's an external world. So in response to any skeptical argument, it's always possible to just reject the skeptical conclusion and also reject one of the premises, or at least say that one of those premises must be false, even if you can't identify exactly which one. In general, the issue is this. If we take any valid argument consisting of a set of premises and a conclusion, well, the fact that the argument is valid only tells us that it would be inconsistent to hold the premises while rejecting the conclusion. You can't hold all the premises and deny the conclusion. So you can't hold the three premises of our argument against free will while also holding that there is free will, on pain of inconsistency. But nothing in the argument itself tells us which proposition must be given up. The person who rejects free will wants you to retain the premises while rejecting free will. You can just turn the argument around, though. You can assert free will and reject one of the premises. So this is a problem that turns up everywhere, and according to Woods, it's the most difficult problem in philosophy. How do we decide whether a valid argument is a sound demonstration of a counterintuitive truth or a reductio of one of its premises? Now, to be honest, I can't help but feel like this is a bit of a cheat. I mean, there is a problem here, but it's more a question of how philosophers should go about resolving their disputes. And I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any reason to expect a single answer to this. It will depend on the context. We might apply different tools to adjudicate the argument concerning determinism versus the argument concerning external world skepticism. You might resolve a dispute by reducing it to a semantic difference, or by appealing to pragmatic factors, or by appealing to intuitions, or you might show that it's resolvable empirically, or whatever. It seems to me, for example, that debates about free will might well just turn on how we define the phrase free will. So it's really a matter of semantics. That kind of move seems less likely to work in the case of external world skepticism. So, what is philosophy's most difficult problem? Well, here are some criteria. First, obviously, it must be difficult. This means it must have been debated for a long time, with no consensus on the answer, nor any consensus on how to go about solving it. There must be a very wide range of views available, where all of these views involve commitments to counterintuitive claims. Consider how in the ontology of mathematics you have Platonism, logicism, intuitionism, structuralism, deflationary views. There seems to be a broad range of different positions. The debate's been going on for a long time. No real prospect of a solution, so that looks like a genuinely difficult problem. Second, it must be an interesting problem, one that matters to a wide range of people or has consequences for many areas of philosophy. Compare the units of selection problem, which is specific to philosophy of biology, but not obviously relevant beyond that, to something like the analysis of knowledge, which concerns a concept that is applied in a wide range of fields and in everyday life, right? You don't have to be an epistemologist to care about knowledge. Third, it can't be a meta problem. So this is a bit more difficult to define precisely, but I suppose what I want to say here is, it can't have as its subject matter how philosophers go about solving problems. Or maybe I should say it can't be a problem that captures a whole load of apparently unrelated philosophical problems. I mean, this is what I don't like about Woods's choice. He identifies something that occurs across almost all philosophical debates, and that feels like cheating. It needs to be something more specific. Actually, I guess another issue, like I said, with Woods's choice, is that there's no reason to think that there's going to be a single answer to it, right? It looks like there's good reason to think that there's going to be different answers depending on the context, and so maybe that's what I should say here. Hopefully, you have a sense of what I'm trying to rule out with this third criterion. Fourth, it can't be a problem that can plausibly amount to just semantics. Now, obviously, it's possible to argue that almost any conceivable philosophical problem is really just a matter of semantics, but there are some debates that are more prone to this than others. I've already mentioned that the free will debate just depends a lot on how we define free will, at least when you look at the harder determinist versus the compatibilist camps. Plausibly, the free will debate arises because the phrase free will is just rather vague and can be made precise in different contradictory ways. By contrast, take the debate about modal realism. When David Lewis says that all possible worlds really exist and are just the same kind of thing as the actual world, while the linguistic erzatzist says that possible worlds are sets of propositions, while the anti-realist says that there are no possible worlds, that seems like a genuine disagreement about ontology, not about the definitions of our terms. So those are 4 criteria for the most difficult philosophical problem. Any other criteria I should have included? Anyway, with these 4 criteria in mind, my own inclination is to say that the most difficult problem would be maybe something like the hard problem of consciousness. In that case, there's a huge range of views still in play. I mean, my take on this is that there's just no good reason at all to choose between, say, panpsychism, the view that phenomenal properties are ubiquitous and fundamental, versus the view that consciousness emerges only with very sophisticated language and reasoning. So consciousness is something that's found only in some humans. There's no good reason to choose between either of them, or any number of views in between. Nor is there any clear way to proceed on getting an answer. Plus, it's a question that many people find interesting. It's it's a specific problem. It's not a meta problem, and it doesn't just reduce to semantics. So that's my initial inclination, is to say something like that. Of course, all this prompts another question, which is, what's philosophy's least difficult problem? Or maybe I should say, what's philosophy's most overrated problem? What's a problem that many philosophers think is difficult to solve, many philosophers think has wide-ranging implications, but that you think is actually easy and uninteresting? I'm tempted to say maybe Newcomb's problem, because the answer to that one is blatantly obvious. But then part of the appeal of Newcomb's problem is precisely the fact that, as Nozick put it, the answer seems obvious to everyone, it's just that different people find different answers obvious, with the opposing half finding their opposition silly. So yeah, maybe that wouldn't be a good choice. But yeah, what do you think? What's philosophy's most difficult problem? And what's its most overrated problem? Let me know.